So a little while later, Longchenpa writes a different poem, and this relates to path. Go to the mountain tops, charnel grounds, islets, and fairgrounds, places that make the mind waver, and let the body dance, the voice sing, and let the mind project its innumerable thoughts. Fuse them with the view and practice of spontaneous liberation, and thus all arises as the path. So part of that practice was kind of a bit in thinking about what path means, and it's not just a path going forward, right? We can often think about that, like if we're hiking, we're like I love to go out hiking. I haven't been doing it much this summer, but there's almost like the what's next sort of thing, right? What's around that bend? You're looking ahead. And if you're me, you end up stumbling over roots and rocks and all kinds of other things because you're not aware of where you are. That's, I think, a good metaphor for how important it is to maybe anticipate and enjoy where we are as we are anticipating what's coming. Yeah. Or maybe reflecting on what the terrain we've just gone through when we're hiking. We're out there. And a path, I think, assumes a journey of some kind. And I think the interesting thing to consider is that even though sometimes we may feel like we're not on a path or the path, if we can identify one in our lives, we're still on it. Separation is not an indicator of whether or not we're on or off of a path. Um, and so, in many ways, what we've been doing for these several weeks has been looking at a map, looking at a way sort of around and through the wilderness, if you will, a path leading perhaps to greater realization, and a compass towards this thing Longchenpa calls freedom. And so it's interesting that along the way, it's both personal and it's collective. Because the path that we're on, unless we're out in a cave somewhere in the Himalayas or some other mountain range, we're still interacting with the world. This is what, in some ways, makes practice difficult, is that we are we're interdependent and part of our human societies. So there is the personal aspect, and then there is that which we bring from our refuge or practice in refuge out into the world, ideally. And according to the tantric view in Buddhism, everything is part of the path. Nothing is excluded. Whatever it may be, our messiness, our excesses, our dreams, our desires, basically the totality of who we are. And in that way, even being this feeling of being off of a path means we're still not off the path. We bring that too onto the path. So, what does your life look like when you think about path? Given four things. One, that you can't really leave it. But it doesn't mean you're separate, even if you're taking a break from focusing on it. Two, what if your spiritual practice, or more importantly, the path that contains your practice, is the overarching principle of your life, as opposed to just being one little part of it, along with work, family, friends, and all of these other things. This is having a practice, but being on a path is, I think, more about the fact that the path maybe is defining our lives, and everything else is part of that path. Yeah, and you can tell me what you think about these things. But the third part is that our practice teaches us maybe a more skillful form of renunciation in the midst of turbulence, in the midst of challenges and conflicts in the world. And what do we mean by renunciation? It's not just I'm going to become a wandering monk and beg for food and such. No, it's what aspects of our lives and our inner reactivities are we willing to relinquish? And if we can't, what aspect of judgment about it are we willing to relinquish? Especially if we consider all of it as part of the path. So renunciation here has many layers. And so maybe our path is one that allows for that, even if we don't know how. Staying on it, holding the vow, if you will, to be of benefit. And in so doing, um, becoming a little more selfless in the process. The fourth involves vow. What is the vow that we make? What are you most dedicated to? What are the three mission statements of your path, if you will? Not to reduce it down or to turn it into something sort of artificial, but maybe sitting with what is it that defines my path? When I was younger, when I was a very little chaplain and just starting out, um, I was reluctant to define my path. And my director asked me, the director of my spiritual care department asked me, well, what are you? You know, you seem to be a Buddhist, but, you know, I also had a background in Unitarian Universalism. I was part of a community in California when I was there, and I've studied with Vedanta teachers and all of that. I mean, I was really reluctant to really label myself in any way. There was something really uncomfortable about it. And he said, that's maybe okay for you, but the patients are going to want to know because they want to have confidence that you are located somewhere. And I thought, well, all right, if it's for the patients. I went home that day and I was talking to my then wife about this, and she said, look, you have been practicing meditation, vipassana, and mindfulness and shamatha. You've been doing all of this all these years. You got your degree in Buddhist and Hindu religions. You've taken refuge in a sangha. You've basically, she listed down all the things. She said, what about you as not a Buddhist? Uh, I couldn't say. It was the first time I could actually really consider myself a Buddhist. But it's not just that a Buddhist means something limited. It doesn't mean that there aren't other influences. So I said, all right, I'll grant you all this, but I am a Buddhist plus. So after all, my mother made me promise that I would become an Episcopal priest. She was raised in the Episcopal Church. My father was a Lutheran minister, and he made me promise that I'd become a Lutheran minister if I have. So of course I was going to become a Buddhist. I mean, with that kind of family conflict, are you kidding? So anyway, um, this notion of past, present, and future. This is the last thing I'll say about this, because I really feel like path is a part of this. And when we encounter the world, we really want to do it on the path, in my opinion. And something that we did on our retreat earlier this year up at Rolling Ridge, we talked a bit about the Buddha Maitreya, the Buddha of the future Buddha. Um, there is this notion, even in Buddhism, of the future and what is to come. Right? We're taught often be fully present in the here and now and da 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 da. But the future is important because what we are cultivating now determines what arises in the future, and this is true collectively. You know, how we respond to struggles, how we talk about them, how we think about them, the kind of mindfulness we bring into the discourse matters for what comes next. There's a lot at stake in the world. And so I think bringing our path into this dynamic means we want to have a sense of what we're creating, both in our practice for the benefit of the world, of others and all beings, and for ourselves. And in that way, um, the past is important. We learn from it, we process our illnesses, our traumas, and we heal. The healing of our past is extremely full of teaching. It's so important. The future, seeing what things we want to unfold and how can we contribute. Aspiration, this notion of bodhicitta, this notion of um, attending to suffering compassionately in a way where my own practice and realization grows, that my well-being depends on yours, and vice versa. It has both an aspiration and it requires action. This is all part of perhaps a vision we may have. And it's okay to have a vision. It's okay to have aspiration. So, the Buddha Maitreya is this notion um, of the Buddha to come during an age of challenges and suffering and great societal conflict, global conflict, and those things, illness, and all of that. One day, the teachings say that the future Buddha Maitreya will arise when things are at their worst. It will come to offer a new round of teachings. And Maitreya, the name, if some of you are sort of wondering, this sounds a little bit like Maitri, which is loving kindness, is intentional. Maitreya is the future Buddha is the Buddha of love, the Buddha of becoming through love, basically. This is how I like to talk about it. And many of us now are sort of seeing this future Buddha in the form of a community, not as a person or as a deity or anything, but as a community. It's up to us, communally in community, to ripen and bring to fruition this notion of a transformed society, an easing of suffering where we all uh, are concerned and caring about it, not just the few of us who are on a path. So if this is part of the path of the future, then maybe that gives us a good reason to think about what defines my path. What are the sort of the three elements? There may be more, there may be one overarching. However you define it, I think having a sense when you're practicing that this practice is happening on a path and these are the things that I'm most dedicated to. Um, this way, we're not encountering suffering in the world when we're frustrated and such. So, coming back in some ways to where we started with naked awareness, which we encounter immediately on the path as we practice. Hopefully, we do through mindfulness and such. Here, it's more about the path that is being walked, how we show up, and what we want to create. Yeah. So this is sort of the culmination of these 7 stages, and it doesn't mean we're finished. You know, in the same way that the Eightfold Path has these 8 stages, they're not necessarily linear. They are mutually informing. We come back around. We encounter these things differently. We grow. It's like reading a really good book from a teacher that we love. You know, every time we read it, we notice something different. We encounter it differently. What a blessing. And so these teachings are meant in that spirit as well. So the goal, or rather the path, the map, it's not a straight line, but it's circuitous and it brings you back again. You can continue to cultivate. So this is at least my hope for these 7 stages. I hope that you have found them helpful in some way. I will be writing up just a short summary along with Longchenpa's poem for anybody who would like a copy, just to remember what are we doing here, what have we been doing. And the videos will be also on YouTube for every stage as well. Right?